Thank you for being here for this. You know, we're really looking forward to you coming over to Australia, and we're doing our utmost now to make this really happen. So, look, I'd like to just ask you straight out, you know, you're a psychologist, right?
Sure. Yeah, technically, I call myself a psychotherapist, but my doctorate is in clinical psychology. Yeah.
Great. So, but your focus is past lives, which is really interesting. Not a lot of psychotherapists go in that direction. What was your journey? What led you to this? And, you know, why focus on the past lives?
Well, I guess it started when I was 15 and I studied metaphysics and learned about karma and reincarnation. And it just felt true to me, even though I went to Catholic elementary school and my parents were Baptist. Something never quite clicked about that, even though, I got a good religious foundation. But when I started to really dig a little deeper, I started to learn about karma and reincarnation, and it just made sense. So later, when I was in undergrad, I wanted to study psychology. It just lit up for me.
Right.
But when I read all the research on outcome studies of psychotherapy, unfortunately, the outcome studies suggested that people who actually experienced psychotherapy and the people who didn't experience psychotherapy to resolve a particular issue, there was no statistically significant difference, meaning the therapy didn't significantly improve outcome more than no therapy. So, I thought, okay, I'm going in a profession that has a process that really doesn't significantly improve a person's condition relative to not doing anything. And I thought that, there's a problem with that. Certainly having somebody to talk to feels good when you've got an issue or problem, but, I was very interested in results.
Fantastic.
And so I started.
Go on.
Yeah. So I started to do a little more research in the field. And I remember when I was studying Freud, Freud actually started out doing hypnotic regression in the beginning of his career. And he found it incredibly effective initially, but there was, unfortunately, people relapsed. And he didn't understand kind of why, because it seemed to work really well in the beginning, but then there was a relapse. And, with my understanding of past lives, I thought, well, if you're just dealing with this lifetime, if you assume that we've lived many past lifetimes, maybe hundreds or thousands, then this lifetime is just the tip of the iceberg. And so what Freud was doing, it seemed to me, was that he was dealing with, traumas, challenges that he experienced in this lifetime, and he would resolve those through hypnotic regression. But because he wasn't going far enough back, his results were impermanent. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do this work, I'm going to have to figure out a way to get a person back into the past lives, get them where a lot of these challenges started. And my assumption was that a lot of our, emotional, mental, a lot of our issues have their origin in past lives, in one or more past lives. So I really set out, even though I was traditionally trained, I set out to really learn how to access past lives to resolve issues.
Was there a trigger or a moment in your life? Did you have a past life experience that just got you on that track, on that road? Why past lives? Why was that the focus?
Well, I started studying metaphysics when I was 15 and started meditating. I learned about karma and reincarnation, and I started to have an awareness of the reality of past lives and reincarnation. So by the time I got to undergrad, it just made sense to me that, okay, if we're going to deal with issues, we got to go back to where they really started.
You created your own therapy called soul journey therapy. How does that differ from other forms of regression?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because typically hypnotic regression is called regression. Hypnotic processes are called hypnotic regression or age regression, and they use hypnosis. It occurred to me as a result of my studies in, you might say, metaphysics and consciousness, that ideally, if you're going to take somebody back into, let's say, early childhood, prenatal, past lives, then you want them to be fully conscious, not in a hypnotic trance. And so I was interested in finding a way to take a person back without putting them into a hypnotic trance so that they be fully conscious as they, you might say, experience a particular past life incident. And so that's the difference between soul journeys and hypnotic regression. Is soul journeys is a conscious process of reliving past lives and resolving issues, and hypnotic regression is relatively unconscious because the person's put in trance.
I find that really fascinating. I mean, how do we access all that deeply buried subconscious material consciously if it takes normal psychotherapists, hypnotic regression to get there? How did you discover this practice? What is it exactly? How does it differ?
Yeah. Well, what I found, first of all, I can't say that you might say, created this process myself. I mean, like most processes, I stood on the shoulders of someone else and evolved it beyond where I learned it. There was a doctor in LA by the name of Morris Netherton who was doing a form of non-hypnotic past life therapy that I worked with him, and I learned his system. But he specifically only dealt with past lives. He didn't deal with the between life. He didn't deal with a lot of things that I knew to be important, although maybe not crucial in the beginning. So I learned Dr. Netherton's process and then evolved it and refined it to what it is today, past life therapy. And it's really interesting that most people think, well, past lives, you would have to be in trance or you'd have to have some kind of hypnotic process to access them. But what people don't realize is we're in and out of, you might, past life responses, throughout our day often.
Right.
Little things trigger fears, reactions, and whatnot. They have their roots in past lives. We just aren't conscious of it. And so when I sit down with someone and I do an intake interview and I start to ask them about their life, what's their challenges, what are their fears, what would they like to change, and when they start to talk about that, it's easy to identify the areas of their life that are likely tied to past life trauma. Yeah. And so we focus on those and determine where to start based on that.
So it's almost like, you said throughout your day you're in and out of reacting through these past life karmic conditions that have been set up from the past. So it's not something that you need to dig deep to enter. You're always constantly, you have access to it, basically. This is fascinating. Yeah. And yet most people are just totally unaware that that's what's going on.
I remember, for instance, a Jewish physician who came to me, and he said he had an issue with authority. And I thought that was interesting because he was an authority himself. He was an MD. But he said whenever he had to confront anybody who was in a position of authority, even if they came to him as a patient, he felt a little, anxious, nervous, uncomfortable. And so I knew right away, okay, that's an exaggerated response to an authority. So that's got to be there's got to be some history behind that. And he didn't have anything of significance in this life that would account for that kind of discomfort. And it just turned out when we did the Soul Journeys session with him, he had been a black slave in a past life. And he had been abused in that life by the slave owners and eventually killed. So in his mind, unconsciously, any person of authority was a threat. And unconscious would tell him when he was in the face of any authority that I could die, And that's something that happens regardless of our conscious awareness. We can rationalize, that doesn't make sense, but the fear response will still be there until the source of it is resolved.
And so, how do we actually resolve these conditions?
Yeah, we actually have to go back to the lifetime or lifetimes. Sometimes it's a series of lifetimes where a certain incident that happened. Usually, it's traumatic. And we have to relive that particular traumatic episode and release the emotion that's tied with the trauma. And really, it's an emotional release that is, you might say, the healing factor A lot of times, for instance, a hypno-regressionist will take a person back in the past life and they'll get the story, but unfortunately, they may not release the emotion completely,
Right.
the emotional charge. And that's what you might say distinguishes soul journeys from hypnotic regression, is we make sure we not only get the story, but we release the emotional charge fully. And that takes a specific, you might say, process that if you don't understand it, you won't really clear the trauma correctly or completely.
Okay. And does everybody that you work with go back to these past lives, or there's some people that just can't access them?
I would say 95% of the people I work with can access them. When someone can't access them, and that's just a very rarity, it's usually because they're just not ready to experience that. They're not ready to kind of, you might say, resolve an issue. At that point, they have to kind of live through it. In fact, sometimes I'll suggest to a person like that, come back, give me a call 6 months or a year from now, and let's see if we can get at it then. But rarely is that the case.
So it's got nothing to do with belief, does it? Like, you don't need to believe in reincarnation necessarily to have this experience.
Yeah, I often say, do you need to believe in gravity for it to impact you?
Right.
It's just as gravity is a physical law, reincarnation is a spiritual law. And if you know how to apply it, it applies to everyone, because it affects everyone.
So somebody who's got, let's say, if they're a Christian or a Muslim and they don't believe in reincarnation, and they come along and have this encounter and this experience, how do they integrate that with their beliefs? How do they deal with it?
It's interesting that you asked that, because I've had, plenty of people who come to me, Christian, Muslim, who didn't necessarily believe in reincarnation. And I basically say, look, I'm not here to change your belief system. I'm here to resolve an issue for you to help you therapeutically. And this process typically does that. If you want to see the experience as a metaphor, you can see it as a metaphor for whatever is going on with you. Interestingly enough, though, they will go through past lives just as easily as anyone else. And sometimes after they've gone through the experience, it's so real and compelling, it's kind of hard for them to see it metaphorically. But, the good news is they're free of the issue. So, I let them kind of deal with, just kind of where they want to let that sit. But the bottom line is we've resolved the issue, and then, they can go from there.
I heard you mention earlier in between lives. Do you work with those as well? And actually, what about other experiences? Like you mentioned birth experiences you work with. And what about future lives? Does this all come into play?
In between lives is a specific area that I work with. Only certain people, you might say, are interested in that. Usually people who have a little more experience with past lives and reincarnation, a little more awareness, maybe they're meditators. And usually the between life process I use to help a person get a sense of why they incarnated into this life. What are the major life lessons that they came here to learn, to experience, to grow from? What are the most significant relationships that they have in this life that they need to resolve? It's almost like, what is their dharma, their mission in this life? And the between life session is a good opportunity to really see that clearly. And I remember, for instance, one woman who came to me who was very interested in that. And in the between life session, she saw that she chose her mother because her mother in this life was a woman who was actually living in South America as a young woman, but she could see from the other side that she was destined to come to the U.S. And this particular soul knew part of her karma was to live in the U.S. And also this particular soul was a woman who, in a past life, she had been a little girl, and my client had been a nun who took her in as an orphan and raised her. And so they had a really strong love bond between them. And so she felt that this particular soul would be a good mother for her in this life because she was essentially like a mother for her in that previous life. So they had a strong bond, and of course, that woman did end up once she gave birth in South America, but she did move to the U.S. And this woman, continued her life here in the U.S. as she had needed to. So, but she could also even see some of the health concerns that she'd have in the body in this life before she even came into it. She could see karmically what the conditions that she was going to have to face, even in terms of health.
Right.
So a lot of times that awareness is available in the in-between life state, and that's why we go there.
And so what about the birth experience? You also go in there. There's often things that need to be addressed or checked there.
Yeah, birth is very, very important. Sometimes I even start there with people because depending on what went on for the mother during the pregnancy, that gets imprinted, you might say, emotionally and psychically onto the infant. And so you might say it's like getting a computer with software preloaded on it, and you hope it's useful software, but sometimes it's software that's that's a little dysfunctional, it's buggy. So you need to kind of resolve it or maybe even delete some files. Well, when we're born, we come into this life, you might say, with memories and experiences, not only from our past lives that the soul brings in, but we pick up stuff from our mother. And that can have a strong impact on our life. For instance, some mothers are they give birth or they get pregnant accidentally. That's one of the questions I ask in my intake is, were you what's the word I want to use? Do you know if you were a wanted birth or was it just an accident? Did your mother get pregnant accidentally or were you planned? Yeah, that's the word, planned or unplanned. So I often ask if a person was a planned or unplanned pregnancy, and if they were unplanned, then that tells me something, because often if a person has an issue with self-worth, feeling like they always have to please others, they have to always accommodate others, they have to, you might say, overcompensate to feel to hopefully feel included, then often that goes back to an unplanned pregnancy, meaning when the mother first got pregnant, she really didn't want the child, and that happens often. She just doesn't want to be pregnant. It's a bad time, not the right person, whatever. So what happens is there's rejection in the womb right from the start. Right. The infant is rejected. So that'll create a self-esteem issue for a person as an adult. Yeah. And until we resolve that, because unconsciously they're always feeling or thinking that they're not wanted. And they're overcompensating. And sometimes to overcompensate, they're just over-accommodating, too nice, won't really honor their own needs.
Okay. I also mentioned future lives. Is that at all possible to connect with one of those? Have you had an experience yourself, or have others popped into the future?
Yeah, well, future lives are like possible, you might say, incarnations. The future is not set, but based on a person's, you might say, present life trajectory and the way they're thinking and feeling in their state of consciousness, they're likely to move into a certain direction in the future. And you can see that. You can move forward on the time track as well as back. So in that sense, we can go to probable future lives. And since there's a lot of possibilities, we can actually choose one that may reflect the person's more their ideals, what they would really like to live. And you might say, empower that life to manifest more than sort of other directions. That can even be done in this life. Let's say a person wants to accomplish something in this life. We can actually move forward in the time track to reinforce a particular experience in this life in the future, as opposed to other experiences. I remember I even had one father who sent me his, I guess he was about a 16-year-old son who is sort of a star softball player in Little League, not Little League, not softball, but Little League baseball. A very strong hitter, I remember. But it's for some reason the kid went into a slump and he just couldn't hit at all. And he was so good at it that, you know, the team captain, everybody's wondering what happened. So he actually sent him to me to say, well, is there anything you can do about this, you know? And I actually took him into a future. It was just a sort of a short time in the future. And we actually had him experience himself really being a successful hitter again, you know? And he actually relived that to where he's hitting home runs and whatnot. And right after we completed that session, it was just one session, he went back within a week. His game was on again.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, and we can change the future or move into what would be an ideal future. Yeah. It's all possible.
So the future, you go into the future and you change your past. It's fascinating, isn't it? How we have this flexibility and don't really know it. We think we're stuck in this moment only, you know. Look, I wonder, what is the ultimate purpose of all these lives? You know, we've how many billions have we lived, and where are we going? You know, where does it all lead?
Well, you know, that's a good question. I think it's not many of my clients that ask that.
Right.
But you know, I guess at the end of the day, you know, we're going to get to the point where we understand that we're here to, you might say, give and receive love, to help people understand that we're all soul and that we're all divine beings. And at a certain level, we're all connected. And that we're just here to support one another in reaching that state of awareness where we realize that we're all connected. And that this is only, you might say, a stage. This realm, this world, this life is a stage where we're here to learn that we're all connected, we're all one, and we're really here to just support each other, achieve that awareness. So,
you know, you'll be in Australia soon to present your Soul Journey workshop, and I must say that I've had a personal, direct experience with you in an audience once. You guided a group of 200 or 300 through the process. And I went back to a past life in England. I want to share this because it showed me how powerful your work is. I went back to a past life in medieval England, and I was a priest in a underground prison in London. And I came out of there, and then I said to my wife, "What happened to you? Where did you go?" She goes, "Oh, well, I went back to medieval England, and I had my father looked after this prison, and I met you down there as a priest. We went back to the exact same past life together." And, you know, that proved to me how incredibly powerful and real these past life experiences are, because, you know, we both journey to the same place, right? So I guess I wanted to share that, because a lot of people sometimes say, hey, look, it just could be your imagination, or it's just some kind of fantasy you guide these people through and they dream up. But how do you explain that if it's not just actually connecting to a true past life, right? So I'm so looking forward to you coming out and sharing this with our group of Australians, because I know that they're going to be benefiting greatly from all that you're offering. But you're doing more than just a group workshop situation, aren't you? You're going to guide people in processes in little groups, so they can really get the feel of what this is all about.
Yeah, whenever I do a workshop, I take people through, as a group, their own past life experience, as you experience. So all the attendees will have an opportunity to experience their own past life. And as you saw, you know, that's why I titled my book Karmic Relationships, because you and your wife went into the same past life. So obviously you have karmic ties. And we all have karmic ties with significant others in our life, whether they're family, friends, co-workers and whatnot. But yeah, it's everyone will have an opportunity to experience a past life similar that you had.
Fantastic. I want to ask you a personal question. What past lives have you had in Australia that drew you to come over and do this good work here?
That's an interesting question. I've never even thought to even ask or to look into that. And I think I will, because now that you've asked, because it's funny. I don't know if you can see behind me, there's a didgeridoo here. And I learned to play that in about 2 weeks. I had heard, I was at like a whole life expo, and some people actually were in a booth who had didges and they were playing it, and I loved the sound. The sound just drew me to their booth, and I just had to have one of those things. And within 2 weeks, I taught myself to play it, so including the circular breathing. So I know I have some connection with Australia. I'm just not sure what.
Wow.
But I've seen a lot of past lives I've had, and they're all over the place.
Yeah.
A lot in Asia and whatnot. But one thing I want to mention, because you mentioned how some people might think, oh, is this my imagination, or am I making this up, some kind of fantasy? I remember once, although I've had this reinforced many, many times, that the reality of this, but one experience really stands out as a woman who came to me. I had been working with her girlfriend doing some past life around a marriage relationship. And she came to me because she had heard of what her girlfriend had experienced. And she said, Dr. Richards, I kind of got a unique situation. She says, I was given up for adoption right at birth. And although I have great adoptive parents, I have a real loving relationship with them. She says, I've always wanted to know and to meet my birth mother. But at birth, they seal the records of who my birth mother was. And so I've had no way of finding out who she was. I'm wondering if you could take me back to sort of the birth and see if there's any way we can find out who my mother was. And I told her, I says, well, I've never used my work for that before, but we can try, see what happens. So actually, to start out, I took her back to when her mother first realized she was pregnant. And her mother was like a teenage girl. And, she had accidentally got pregnant. She's in her bedroom when she realizes that she's pregnant. And she's freaking out. And my client's reliving this and describing in detail her mother's bedroom. And, with her mother. And then we went to the point where her mother first told the family that she was pregnant. And her boyfriend was there, who happened to be Hispanic. And the family weren't happy about this, and the grandmother particularly was pretty angry and was suggesting that something has to be done about this, or you. And so it was a tense scene. And then I took her to the birth, where she's in her mother's in the delivery room, and she's giving birth. And as she comes out of the womb, we're sort of listening to see if there are any cues as to who her mother really is. And at a certain point, when she's born, the doctor says, oh, Mrs. Smith, you have a beautiful baby daughter. So we got her mother's last name. And then the doctor handed her off to a nurse. And at some point, her mother's first name was mentioned. Mm. And so we got her biological mother's first and last name. So we ended the session, and she right away hired a private detective, because she knew the city and the state she was born in, and she knew, of course, the date. So she gave him that information. Within days, he called her back and says, this is your mother's phone number. You can contact her if you like. Wow. She contacted her mother, had an incredible reunion, ended up flying up to spend some time with her. They got along famously. Her mother had said, I've always been curious, wanting to know, what happened to you. So they had this incredible reunion. But the interesting thing that happened was, she asked her mother, she said, when you first got pregnant with me and you were, kind of upset about it, and you were in your bedroom, did you have a dresser that looked like this and certain furniture that looked like, and her mother's like eyes lit up, how in the world did you know that, you know?
Yeah.
Then she went on to describe the scene where her mother was telling the family that she was pregnant, and her mother was just blown away that it was almost like she was sort of hovering there watching that scene on the inner. And so it confirmed everything she had experienced, even in the prenatal before the birth. And she even got in contact with her biological father. And so she really reconnected with everyone. And the story was so popular that a news organization even wanted to pick it up. But she decided she didn't want that much exposure.
Right. Well, that's amazing. I think that the Australian people are going to really enjoy your visit, and I'm so excited and I welcome you with open arms. So it's not far away. You're going to be travelling around Australia with Brisbane events, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Perth, and you're going to have a little bit of a holiday between. I understand you're going to go up to Uluru to Alice Springs and check out the Northern Territory, and it's going to be fantastic, Charles. I so look forward to it. So thank you so much. Do you have anything you'd like to share with our listeners at all?
No, I'm just looking forward to working with them and sharing the experience with them. And I can pretty much guarantee it's going to be transformational for everyone who attends. So
beautiful.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks so much. Okay. I'll see you soon. Okay.
You bet, Leo.
All the best. Thanks, Charles. Bye-bye.